The Gulfstream G700 descended through the pre-dawn darkness over Ouagadougou, its navigation lights cutting through the African night like fallen stars. Inside the luxurious cabin, Marcus Beaumont sat motionless, his weathered hands gripping a manila envelope that contained 30 years of carefully guarded secrets. At 62, he was arguably the most powerful man on Earth, his net worth exceeding $400 billion, his technology empire spanning continents, his influence reaching into the highest echelons of global power. Yet tonight, he felt like a frightened child. The private jet touched down at Ouagadougou International Airport at exactly 3 a.m., just as Marcus had planned. No press conferences, no diplomatic fanfare, only the humid African air and a convoy of black Mercedes-Benz vehicles waiting on the tarmac like silent sentinels. His security detail, comprised of former Navy SEALs and MI6 operatives, moved with military precision as they escorted him from the aircraft. But Marcus's attention was elsewhere. Through the bulletproof glass of his vehicle, he could see the presidential palace in the distance, its golden dome illuminated against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in that building was Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader who had overthrown the French-backed government and become a symbol of African resistance against neocolonialism. What Ibrahim didn't know was that the world's most powerful businessman was also his long-lost brother. Marcus opened the envelope in his lap, revealing a faded photograph from 1993. Two young boys stood beside their mother in front of a modest home in Ouagadougou. The older boy, perhaps 7, stood straight and proud, already showing the bearing of a future leader. The younger one, barely 4, smiled innocently at the camera, unaware that this would be one of the last photographs of their family together. The older boy was Ibrahim. The younger one was Moussa Traoré, the name Marcus had abandoned 30 decades ago when French-backed militias murdered their father and shattered their family forever. Dawn was breaking over Burkina Faso as President Ibrahim Traoré reviewed agricultural reports in his modest office. Unlike many African leaders, Ibrahim had maintained the Spartan lifestyle of his military days. His desk was simple wood, his chair uncomfortable by design, constant reminders that leadership was service, not privilege. At 35, Ibrahim had already lived several lifetimes. As a young captain, he had led the military coup that expelled French mining companies and reclaimed Burkina Faso's natural resources for its people. He had survived 3 assassination attempts, navigated complex international politics, and somehow managed to improve his country's economy while maintaining its sovereignty. His greatest strength, perhaps, was his ability to see through deception. Years of military intelligence work had taught him to read people, to detect the subtle signs that revealed true intentions. It was this skill that had kept him alive and his nation free. "Mr. President," his aide announced, interrupting his morning routine, "Marcus Beaumont is here. He's requesting an immediate meeting." Ibrahim set down his coffee cup slowly. The name was legendary, the reclusive tech billionaire who had revolutionized artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable energy. Forbes called him the richest man alive, though Beaumont himself rarely appeared in public. "The Marcus Beaumont?" Ibrahim asked, though he already knew the answer. "What does he want?" "He says it's about a proposal that could transform Burkina Faso forever, sir." Ibrahim had dealt with wealthy investors before. They arrived with promises of development and partnerships, speaking eloquently about progress and mutual benefit. They typically left with mining contracts and tax breaks, while the people remained impoverished. But Beaumont was different. His companies had never shown interest in African resources, focusing instead on technology and innovation. "Send him to the main conference room," Ibrahim ordered, "and gather the full cabinet. If the world's richest man wants to make a proposal, everyone should hear it." What Ibrahim didn't know was that this meeting would shatter everything he believed about his past, his family, and his identity. The presidential palace's main conference room filled quickly with ministers, advisors, and security chiefs, all buzzing with curiosity about their unexpected visitor. The room itself was a study of contrasts. Traditional African art adorned walls fitted with state-of-the-art security systems, while carved wooden chairs surrounded a modern conference table. Ibrahim entered last, his military uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. He had learned that first impressions mattered in international diplomacy, and he wanted this billionaire to understand he was dealing with a serious leader, not a puppet to be manipulated. When Marcus Beaumont walked through the doors, accompanied by his security detail, the room fell silent. Marcus Beaumont stopped mid-stride, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. Those eyes, the same dark brown eyes he remembered from childhood, the same strong jawline their father had possessed, the same proud bearing that had defined their family for generations. It was like looking at a ghost, or perhaps a reflection of the man he might have become if he had stayed in Africa, if he had remained Moussa Traoré instead of becoming Marcus Beaumont. Ibrahim noticed the reaction immediately. His intelligence training kicked in, analyzing the stranger's micro-expressions. The slight tremor in the billionaire's hands, the momentary loss of composure, the way his breathing had changed. These were not the reactions of a businessman presenting a routine proposal. "Mr. Beaumont," Ibrahim said, extending his hand in formal greeting, "welcome to Burkina Faso." Marcus took the offered hand, and Ibrahim felt the tremor in the billionaire's grip. Strange that the most powerful businessman in the world would be nervous about a meeting with the leader of one of the world's poorest nations. "President Traoré," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotional earthquake occurring within him. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I know your time is valuable." They sat across from each other, the massive conference table between them like a chasm spanning 30 years of separation. The cabinet members leaned forward eagerly, anticipating what had brought this titan of industry to their country. Marcus opened his briefcase with deliberate slowness, his mind racing. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, but seeing Ibrahim, seeing his brother alive and strong and successful, had thrown all his preparations into chaos. Should he reveal the truth immediately? Should he proceed with the business proposal and reveal his identity later? Should he protect the secret that had consumed his life for 30 years? "President Traoré, distinguished ministers," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing world leaders. "I'm here to make an offer that will sound impossible, perhaps even insulting, but I ask that you hear me out completely before responding." Ibrahim nodded, his expression unreadable. Around the table, ministers exchanged glances, wondering what the richest man in the world could want from Burkina Faso. Marcus pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "I want to purchase the rights to all Burkina Faso's mineral resources, gold, manganese, uranium, limestone, everything. The price is $100 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. Ministers spoke over each other, some outraged by what seemed like an attempt to buy their country, others excited by the astronomical sum. $100 billion was more than 10 times Burkina Faso's entire GDP. The finance minister was already calculating. "Mr. President, with $100 billion, we could completely transform our infrastructure, eliminate poverty, revolutionize education and healthcare." The economic advisor added, "It would solve our debt crisis overnight and position us as the wealthiest nation in Africa." But Ibrahim remained silent, his eyes fixed on Marcus. His intelligence training had taught him to look beyond the obvious, and something about this offer didn't make sense. Marcus Beaumont's companies had never been involved in mining or resource extraction. His empire was built on technology, innovation, and renewable energy. Why would he suddenly want to buy African minerals? More importantly, the man sitting across from him didn't have the demeanor of someone closing a business deal. His eyes held something else, desperation, perhaps, or guilt. "Why?" Ibrahim asked, quietly, cutting through the chatter like a knife. The room fell silent again, all attention focused on the two men facing each other across the table. Why would the world's richest man, who has never shown interest in mining, suddenly want to buy all our resources? What's the real reason you're here, Mr. Beaumont? Marcus had prepared for this question. He had PowerPoint presentations about vertical integration, supply chain control, and the future of technology requiring rare earth elements. He had charts showing market projections and strategic advantages. But looking at Ibrahim, looking at his brother, the prepared lies died in his throat. "Because," Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe a debt to this country, a debt that money alone cannot repay." The ministers looked confused. What debt could an American billionaire owe to Burkina Faso? Ibrahim leaned forward, his instincts telling him they were approaching the real reason for this visit. "Explain," Ibrahim said simply. Marcus reached into his briefcase again, but this time his hand hesitated over a particular envelope. Once he revealed its contents, there would be no going back. 30 years of carefully constructed identity would crumble. But looking at Ibrahim, seeing their father's strength reflected in his brother's eyes, Marcus knew the time for lies had ended. "Before I was Marcus Beaumont," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I had another name, another life, another family." He pulled out the faded photograph and placed it on the table like a confession. The image was old and worn, but clear. A woman holding two young boys, standing in front of a modest home. The woman's face was proud and beautiful despite the exhaustion in her eyes. The older boy stood straight and serious, already showing signs of the leader he would become. The younger boy smiled carefree at the camera, innocent and trusting. Ibrahim picked up the photograph and the blood drained from his face. He knew that woman. It was his mother, dead now for 15 years. He knew that older boy. It was himself at age 7. But the younger boy? "No," Ibrahim whispered, his voice breaking. "It's impossible. Musa died. My little brother died in the coup attempt of 1994. I saw the body. We buried him." The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Every person present suddenly understood they were witnessing something far beyond a business transaction. This was a resurrection, a family tragedy unfolding before their eyes, a story that would redefine everything they thought they knew about their president and their country. Marcus, or the man who had called himself Marcus for 30 years, stood up slowly, tears streaming down his face. The billionaire who had stared down hostile corporate takeovers, who had built an empire from nothing, who commanded boardrooms and influenced world leaders, was crying like the lost child he had never stopped being. "I didn't die, Ibrahim," he said, his voice breaking completely. "I survived, but I had to disappear. I had to become someone else. Mother made sure of that." The security chief's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, unsure whether this was some elaborate threat or psychological warfare. But Ibrahim raised his hand, stopping him. His eyes never left Marcus's face, searching for the truth in features that were becoming increasingly familiar. Now that he was really looking, Ibrahim could see it. The shape of the nose, inherited from their father. The curve of the lips, their mother's smile. Even the way Marcus held his shoulders when emotional, it was exactly how little Musa used to stand when he was upset or scared.
"Musa died," Ibrahim repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Mother told me he died. I saw them carry out the body." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You saw them carry out someone, but it wasn't me. Mother arranged it all. She knew they would come for me next, just as they had come for father. The same men who murdered him wouldn't hesitate to kill a 4-year-old boy to eliminate any future threat to their power." Marcus pulled out another document, official DNA test results conducted by 3 independent laboratories. "I had these done 3 months ago when I finally decided to come find you. We share 99.9% genetic markers, Ibrahim. We are brothers." The room was spinning for Ibrahim. Everything he had believed about his past, about his family's tragedy, about the brother he had mourned for 30 years, was crumbling. His little brother, sweet Musa, who loved to draw pictures and tell stories about brave warriors, was alive. He was standing in front of him. He was the richest man in the world. But what nobody in that room realized yet was that this revelation would trigger a crisis that would shake the foundations of both their worlds, threaten the stability of international markets, and put them both in mortal danger. "If you're really Musa," Ibrahim said slowly, his voice hoarse with emotion, "prove it. Tell me something only he would know, something that died with our family." Marcus smiled sadly, and for a moment the billionaire facade fell away completely, revealing the little boy who had never truly left. "You used to tell me stories every night about a brave warrior who would save Burkina Faso. You'd act out all the parts using different voices, the cowardly enemies, the wise elders, the beautiful princess. The warrior's name was always Ibrahim, and he always won by being smart, not just strong." Ibrahim's breath caught in his throat. Only 2 people in the world had known about those stories. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with the memory. "You used to end every story the same way, and that's why little Musa must study hard, so he can be the warrior's wise advisor and help Ibrahim save our people. You always said we'd do it together when we grew up." Ibrahim's composure finally cracked completely. The revolutionary leader who had stood up to France, who had survived coup attempts and assassination plots, who had faced down international pressure with unwavering strength, broke down and wept. "Musa," he whispered, the name a prayer and an apology and a celebration all at once. "My little brother." The ministers watched in stunned silence as their president, their strong, unshakable president, cried for the brother he thought he had lost forever. "Why now?" Ibrahim asked, when he had composed himself enough to speak. "Why reveal yourself now after 30 years?" Marcus returned to his seat, the emotional walls he had built over 30 decades finally crumbling. "Because I'm dying, Ibrahim. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm fortunate. I've spent 30 years building an empire, amassing wealth beyond imagination. But I'm going to die alone, without family, without roots, without you." Several ministers gasped. The richest man in the world, dying? The implications were staggering. Marcus looked directly at his brother, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I didn't come here just to buy minerals, Ibrahim. I came to find my brother. I came to make amends for 30 years of cowardice. The $100 billion? It's not for the resources. It's my entire liquid fortune. I want to give it all to Burkina Faso, to you, to our people. It's the only way I know to ask for your forgiveness." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Not a purchase, but a gift, the largest charitable donation in human history. But even as the brothers began to process this emotional reunion, forces were already moving against them. In corporate boardrooms in New York and London, in government offices in Paris and Beijing, in intelligence hearing alarm bells and emergency meetings. Because Marcus Beaumont's fortune wasn't just his to give away. There were shareholders, board members, creditors, and powerful interests who had their own claims to that money, and they weren't about to let it disappear into Africa without a fight. Ibrahim stood up slowly and walked around the massive conference table. The physical distance he covered was only a few steps, but symbolically he was crossing 30 years of grief, anger, and loss. When he reached his brother, he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He embraced him. The president of Burkina Faso, the revolutionary leader who had stood up to France and survived multiple coup attempts, held his brother and cried openly, "Musa, my little brother, I thought I'd lost you forever." Marcus clung to Ibrahim like a drowning man clinging to a life preserver. For 30 years, he had been Marcus Beaumont, cold, calculating, isolated by wealth and power. But in his brother's arms, he was Musa Traoré again, the little boy who had been ripped away from everything he loved. "I'm sorry," Marcus sobbed. "I'm so sorry I never came back. I'm sorry I let you believe I was dead. I'm sorry I became everything Father fought against." "You came back now," Ibrahim said firmly. "That's what matters. You came home." But even in that emotional moment, Ibrahim's instincts were warning him. This was too big, too dangerous. A fortune of $400 billion would attract predators from every corner of the world. Governments would intervene, corporations would sue, criminal organizations would kill for a fraction of that amount. "We need to talk privately," Ibrahim said, pulling back and addressing his ministers. "Clear the room. This is a family matter now." As the officials filed out, murmuring amongst themselves about the extraordinary revelation they had witnessed, neither brother noticed the aide who lingered just a moment too long near the door. His phone was partially concealed in his jacket, its camera recording everything. Within an hour, that recording would be in the hands of very dangerous people. People who had their own plans for Marcus Beaumont's fortune. People who would kill to prevent that money from reaching Africa. What the brothers didn't know was that the aide who recorded them wasn't working for who they might expect. Not the CIA, not French intelligence, not even Chinese operatives. He was working for something far more dangerous and immediate. Marcus Beaumont's own board of directors. For months, the board had been concerned about their CEO's erratic behavior, the sudden liquidation of assets, the mysterious illness he claimed to have, the complete withdrawal from day-to-day operations. All of it suggested a man who was either having a nervous breakdown or planning something that would destroy the company they had helped build. They had placed surveillance assets around him, including bribing palace staff in Burkina Faso when they learned of his travel plans. They needed to know what Marcus Beaumont was really planning, and now they had their answer. In a gleaming conference room in New York, 12 of the most powerful business leaders in the world watched the recorded conversation with growing horror and rage. Marcus Beaumont, their Marcus Beaumont, was planning to give away their company's entire liquid assets to an African nation. "This is corporate theft," declared Jennifer Walsh, the board chairwoman and former Goldman Sachs executive. "We have legal grounds to stop this," added Robert Chen, the company's general counsel. "Mental incompetency due to terminal illness. We can have him declared unfit to make financial decisions of this magnitude." But the third voice in the room belonged to someone even more dangerous, Colonel James Reeves, former Delta Force operative and current head of Beaumont Industries' private security division. "Legal proceedings take time," Reeves said coldly. "By the time we get court orders, the money could be gone. We need a more direct approach." "You're talking about kidnapping," Walsh said, though her voice lacked moral conviction. "I'm talking about extracting a mentally compromised CEO from a hostile environment," Reeves corrected. "It's what we're paid to do." The board members exchanged glances. They were good people mostly, successful, ethical business leaders who had built their careers on legitimate achievement. But $400 billion was enough to make even good people consider terrible options. "How quickly could you move?" Chin asked quietly. "My team is already en route to Burkina Faso," Reeves replied. "We can have him extracted within 24 hours. What none of them realized was that Marcus Beaumont had anticipated this exact scenario. Years of paranoia had taught him to expect betrayal from every direction, including from those closest to him. He had prepared for this moment more thoroughly than they could imagine. Alone now in the conference room, the brothers sat facing each other across 3 decades of separation. The weight of their shared history hung between them like a bridge built of memories and loss. "Tell me everything," Ibrahim said. "From the beginning. How did you survive? How did you become Marcus Beaumont? How did our little brother become the richest man in the world?" Musa, for he was Musa again now, no longer hiding behind the Marcus Beaumont identity, gathered his thoughts. The story he was about to tell would explain not just his transformation, but reveal the true genius of his mother's planning. "After Mother sent me away that night," Musa began, "I was angry, furious. I wanted to come back and fight, to avenge Father, but I was just a 4-year-old child. The family that took me to London, they were distant relatives Mother had contacted through the university network. They were kind but clinical, paid to keep me safe and silent." He paused, lost in painful memories. "For years I threw myself into studies, mathematics, computer science, engineering. I had this obsession with becoming powerful enough to return and save you, save Burkina Faso, save our people. Mother had told me that knowledge was the only weapon that couldn't be taken away." "But you never came back," Ibrahim observed, not accusingly, just stating a fact that had shaped both their lives. "No," Musa admitted, shame coloring his voice. "By the time I had built my first software company and sold it for $10 million, I had become Marcus Beaumont so completely that Musa felt like a character from a story. I convinced myself that Musa was dead, that it was better for everyone if he stayed dead." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Ibrahim a photograph, a much more recent one. It showed their mother, taken just months before her death, sitting in a modest apartment in Ouagadougou. She was holding a letter. "I found this in her things when I finally returned for her funeral," Musa said quietly. "Do you want to know what it said?" Ibrahim nodded, though he wasn't sure he was ready for another revelation. Musa read from the letter, his voice breaking. "My dear Musa, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have finally come home. I know you think I abandoned you, that I chose Ibrahim over you. But everything I did was part of a plan to save both my sons and our country. Ibrahim was always destined to be a leader, strong, visible, inspiring. But leadership alone cannot change the world. It needs resources, knowledge, power. That was always meant to be your role, my brilliant boy. I sent you away not to lose you, but to forge you into the weapon our people would need. Now it is time to come home and complete the work your father began." Before Ibrahim could fully process this revelation about their mother's grand strategy, his security chief burst through the door without ceremony, a breach of protocol that immediately put both brothers on high alert. "Mr. President, we have a situation. The palace has been compromised. Someone has been transmitting from inside the building. All our communications may be monitored." Ibrahim's military training kicked in instantly. "Lock down everything. No one enters or leaves. Find the source of the breach." He turned to Musa. "It's already started, hasn't it? Your people know you're here." Musa nodded grimly. "My board has probably already filed emergency injunctions in multiple countries. They'll claim I'm being coerced, that you're holding me hostage, that my illness has affected my judgment. They'll try to freeze all assets before any transfer can occur." "Then we move fast," Ibrahim decided. "How quickly can the transfer happen?" "I've already set up the mechanisms," Musa replied, pulling out a sophisticated tablet. "Cryptocurrency networks, gold transfers, bearer bonds, shell corporations in 17 countries, all designed to be untraceable and irreversible. But once I initiate the sequence, there's no going back, and they will come for us, both of us." The security chief's radio crackled with urgent communications. "Sir, we found the source. It's in the communications room, but there's a problem. The room is barricaded from the inside, and whoever is in there is still transmitting."
Before Ibrahim could respond, the lights in the palace suddenly went out. Emergency generators kicked in a second later, bathing everything in dim red light that made the situation feel even more ominous. "We're under attack," Ibrahim said, drawing his sidearm and checking the magazine. "Security Chief, activate Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7 was the palace's ultimate defense measure, a complete lockdown with authorization to use deadly force against any intruders. But what made this attack different from any Ibrahim had faced before was its sophistication. These weren't local rebels or even foreign agents. These were corporate mercenaries with cutting-edge equipment, satellite support, and real-time intelligence. The first explosion rocked the east wing of the palace, followed quickly by a second blast, closer this time. The attackers were methodical and professional, clearing the building room by room. "How many men do you have?" Musa asked his brother, his voice steady despite the chaos. "In the palace, maybe 30 loyal guards," Ibrahim replied. "Against professional mercenaries with superior equipment and intelligence, we're outnumbered and outgunned." Musa was already working on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I'm initiating the transfer now, all of it, every penny." "They'll kill you the moment it's complete," Ibrahim warned. "No," Musa said with a grim smile that reminded Ibrahim of his father. "I've built in multiple safeguards, dead-man switches, biometric locks, distributed authentication. If my vital signs stop registering, if I'm coerced or harmed, the transfer reverses and the money gets donated to various international charities. They need me alive and cooperative." It was brilliant strategy, Ibrahim realized. His little brother had become a master tactician, just on a different battlefield than the military campaigns Ibrahim knew. "But that won't stop them from taking you," Ibrahim pointed out. "Once they have you, they'll find ways to coerce your cooperation." "Which is why," said a new voice from the shadows, "we're going to do something they don't expect." Both brothers spun toward the voice, weapons drawn, as a figure emerged from a concealed passage in the wall that neither of them had known existed. It was a woman, perhaps 30 years old, wearing tactical gear and moving with the fluid grace of someone with extensive military training. She looked directly at Ibrahim and Musa, and both men felt their hearts stop. The woman had their mother's eyes, their father's cheekbones, and a family resemblance that was unmistakable. "Hello, brothers," she said calmly, as explosions continued to rock the palace around them. "My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and I think it's time we had a family reunion." The appearance of a sister neither brother had known existed should have been the most shocking moment of the night. Instead, given everything that had already transpired, it felt almost inevitable.
another piece of their mother's impossibly complex plan falling into place. "Amara?" Ibrahim whispered. The name familiar from childhood stories their mother had told, but which he had assumed were fictional. "Very real, very alive, and very tired of watching you two stumble through this operation," she replied, checking her own weapons with professional efficiency. "Mother didn't just save Musa and train you, Ibrahim. She created 3 weapons against the forces that killed our father. You were the visible leader, Musa was the accumulator of power and resources, and I was the guardian in the shadows." Musa stared at this sister he had never known existed. "How long have you been watching?" 26 years, Amara replied matter-of-factly. "Since I turned 16 and Mother finally told me the truth about our family. I've been tracking both of you, protecting you from threats you never even knew existed, building networks and capabilities that could support this moment." Another explosion, much closer now, reminded them that philosophical discussions would have to wait. "The mercenaries," Ibrahim said urgently. "How do we handle them?" Amara smiled, and it was not a particularly pleasant expression. "We don't handle them. We've been expecting them. In fact, we've been tracking their entire operation for the past 6 months." She activated a communication device, and suddenly the room filled with voices, command posts, tactical teams, surveillance units. But these weren't palace security forces. "Phoenix 1, this is Shadow Command. Package is secure. Initiate containment protocol." "Wait," Musa said, realization dawning. "You're not just protecting us, you've been planning this entire operation." "For years," Amara confirmed. "Mother's plan didn't end with your return, Musa. It was always about this moment, when the 3 of us would finally work together to complete Father's revolution, not just in Burkina Faso, but across all of Africa." The sophistication of the operation became clear as Amara explained while coordinating defensive measures. She hadn't just been watching her brothers. She had been building a continental intelligence network, recruiting allies in every African nation, and preparing for the inevitable backlash that would come when they challenged the global economic order. "The mercenaries think they're conducting a simple extraction," she said, monitoring multiple screens that showed the tactical situation throughout the palace. "What they don't know is that every move they've made has been anticipated. Every route they're taking leads to predetermined kill zones. Every piece of equipment they're using has been compromised." Through the palace windows, they could see something extraordinary happening. Word had spread through Ouagadougou like wildfire. The president was under attack by foreign mercenaries, and the people of Burkina Faso were responding in a way that no one could have predicted. They came by the thousands, on foot, on motorcycles, in cars and trucks, workers and students, farmers and shopkeepers, old and young, all converging on the presidential palace. They weren't armed with modern weapons, but they carried something more powerful: unwavering loyalty to the leader who had truly served them. The mercenary commander, watching through his scope from a nearby building, cursed as he saw the growing crowd. His team had planned for security forces and government troops, but not for tens of thousands of civilians creating a human shield around their target. Any attack now would be a massacre, impossible to cover up or explain to the international community. Inside the palace, Ibrahim watched the growing crowd with amazement and deep emotion. "They came," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "They came, without being asked, without being organized. They came to protect us." This is what happens when you actually serve your people instead of exploiting them. This is the foundation Mother always knew you would build, Ibrahim. This is why your part of the plan was so crucial. Musa's phone buzzed with an incoming video call, a conference call from his board of directors. 12 faces appeared on the screen, all looking furious and desperate. Behind them he could see the emergency session setup in their New York headquarters. Marcus, Musa, this charade ends now. Return to the United States immediately, or we'll have you declared mentally incompetent and reverse every financial transaction you have initiated. You can try, Musa replied calmly, but I've already filed legal papers in Burkina Faso recognizing my birth name and citizenship. Musa Traoré is a Burkina citizen, not subject to your corporate bylaws or American jurisdiction. The chairman's face went purple with rage. You can't just— He can and he has, Ibrahim interrupted, taking the phone from his brother. And if anything happens to my brother, I'll nationalize every one of your company's assets across Africa. Moreover, I'll share our model with every African nation. Your rare earth elements, your minerals, your oil, all of it will be beyond your reach forever. This was the checkmate move that Amara had designed. The board members knew that Ibrahim Traoré had already successfully expelled French mining operations and inspired similar actions across the continent. If he united Africa in complete resource nationalism, it would cost Western corporations trillions of dollars and fundamentally shift global economic power. The chairwoman's voice changed, becoming pleading rather than threatening. Mr. President, surely we can reach some accommodation. Musa is clearly unwell. The cancer has affected his judgment. Let us provide medical treatment, and we can discuss a reasonable charitable contribution to your country. The only thing affecting his judgment, Ibrahim said firmly, is 30 years of guilt for abandoning his family and his people. He's finally thinking clearly for the first time in decades. He ended the call and turned to his siblings. They'll never stop coming for you, Musa. You know that, right? Even if we survive tonight, there will always be another threat, another attempt to reclaim that money. Musa nodded slowly. Unless I'm already dead. Both Ibrahim and Amara stared at their brother as the implications of his words sunk in. What are you talking about? Ibrahim demanded. The cancer diagnosis is real, but I may have exaggerated the timeline. I have perhaps 2 years, not 6 months. I created urgency to force this moment, but now we can use that lie strategically. What if Marcus Beaumont dies tonight? What if he has a very public, very tragic death during this mercenary attack? And what if Musa Traoré lives whatever time he has left in peace as a simple citizen of Burkina Faso? The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. Fake his own death, complete the transfer as a dying man's final act, and then live quietly as his true self while the world mourned the philanthropic billionaire. You've already arranged this, haven't you? Amara asked, recognizing the systematic thinking that had made her brother successful. I've been planning this for months, Musa confirmed. There's a body double at the local hospital, a terminal cancer patient who died yesterday. Similar height and build. His family has been compensated generously, and they understand they're helping to save Africa. Ibrahim looked at his brother with new respect and some concern. You really have thought of everything, but what about your companies, your empire? Already transferred to a charitable foundation, with instructions to continue the work. The technology will be open-sourced, the patents will be public domain, and the profits will fund education and development worldwide. Marcus Beaumont's greatest legacy won't be his wealth, but what he gave away. The sound of helicopters suddenly filled the air, not military helicopters, but news helicopters. The international media had arrived, drawn by reports of the story of the century, the world's richest man trapped in an African palace under attack by mercenaries. This is perfect, Amara said, a strategic smile crossing her face. We have our stage. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most dramatic events in modern history, broadcast live to over 3 billion viewers worldwide. It was theater on a global stage, with the fate of a continent hanging in the balance. First came the announcement. President Ibrahim Traoré appeared on the palace balcony, illuminated by media spotlights and surrounded by the protective crowd below. In a voice that carried the weight of history, he confirmed that Marcus Beaumont was indeed his long-lost brother, Moussa Traoré. He told their story with raw emotion, a family torn apart by political violence, a mother's desperate plan to save her children, 30 years of separation and grief, and finally, an impossible reunion driven by love and the desire for redemption. The crowd wept openly, and around the world, viewers found themselves transfixed by this real-life drama of biblical proportions. Then came the tragedy. An explosion in the palace's west wing, carefully choreographed by Amara's team but appearing completely authentic to observers. Smoke billowed from the windows, security forces ran in apparent chaos, and reports quickly spread that Marcus Beaumont had been caught in the blast while trying to complete his historic donation. The mercenaries, realizing they had been completely outmaneuvered and were now the villains in a global drama, retreated under cover of the confusion. Their extraction mission had become impossible. They were surrounded by international media and tens of thousands of witnesses. The confirmation came 20 minutes later. A body burned beyond recognition, but carrying Marcus Beaumont's identification and personal effects, was carried out on a stretcher. Medical personnel confirmed that the world's richest man, the philanthropist who had tried to give away his entire fortune to lift up Africa, had died in what appeared to be a terrorist attack. The global reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Stock markets crashed as investors realized the implications. Political leaders called emergency sessions. But most importantly, ordinary people around the world mourned the loss of someone who had proven that incredible wealth could be used for incredible good. But in a secure bunker deep beneath the presidential palace, Moussa Traoré, no longer Marcus Beaumont, watched his own death unfold on television screens. Beside him, Ibrahim held his hand, while Amara coordinated the complex operation that was reshaping global perceptions in real time. "How does it feel?" Ibrahim asked quietly. "To be free?" Moussa thought for a long moment, processing emotions he had suppressed for 30 years. "Like I can finally breathe. For 30 years I've been holding my breath, waiting to come home. Now I'm home and I never have to leave again." "You're never leaving again," Ibrahim confirmed firmly. "Whatever time you have left, you'll spend it as yourself, with your family, in the place where you belong." On the screens around them, they could see the global reaction unfolding. In New York, Marcus Beaumont's board of directors watched in horror as their worst nightmare materialized. Their CEO was dead, $400 billion had been transferred to African development, and there was nothing they could do about it. The dead man switches had been replaced with something even more permanent: actual death. International economists predicted chaos, but instead, something remarkable happened. Ibrahim Traoré, working with a carefully selected team of international advisors and African leaders, announced the establishment of the Sankara Beaumont Foundation. Named after Burkina Faso's revolutionary hero Sankara and the billionaire who had sacrificed everything for redemption. The foundation's first act was to guarantee free healthcare and education for every citizen of Burkina Faso. The second was to create a Pan-African development bank offering interest-free loans to African businesses and entrepreneurs. The third was to establish technology transfer programs that would make cutting-edge innovations freely available across the continent. 6 months after the death of Marcus Beaumont, Moussa Traoré was learning to live as a normal person for the first time in 30 years. No bodyguards shadowed his movements, no board meetings demanded his attention, no corporate jets waited to whisk him away to international crises. He lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, indistinguishable from thousands of others except for the small garden where he spent his evenings. The neighbors knew him as the president's quiet brother, a man who had worked abroad and returned home for his health. Ibrahim visited every evening after completing his presidential duties. They would sit in that small garden, drinking traditional tea and slowly filling in 30 years of missed conversations. They talked about their childhood, their parents, their dreams, and their fears. They shared memories that had been locked away and hopes for the future that was now possible. "Do you regret it?" Ibrahim asked one starlit evening. "The money, the power, the empire you built and gave away?" Musa looked up at the same stars they had watched as children before their world had been shattered by violence and loss. "I regret it that it took me so long to realize that money was never power. It was a prison. The richest man in the world was the poorest in spirit. Now I'm dying," he said simply, "but I'm dying as myself, as your brother, as a son of Burkina Faso. That's worth more than all the billions I accumulated." The transformation of Burkina Faso was proceeding at an incredible pace. New schools were being built in every village, equipped with solar panels and satellite internet. Hospitals were opening with state-of-the-art equipment and fully trained staff. Roads were being paved, clean water systems installed, and agricultural programs launched that would make the country food secure within 5 years. But the changes went beyond infrastructure. There was something different in the air, a sense of possibility, of pride, of hope that had been missing for generations. Young Burkina Faso citizens who had planned to emigrate to Europe were staying home to build their country. Diaspora professionals were returning, bringing skills and experience gained abroad. International investors were arriving not as exploiters, but as genuine partners. 18 months after his resurrection as Musa Traoré, the former billionaire found his true calling. He began teaching at the newly established Ouagadougou Institute of Technology, sharing his knowledge with young African engineers and programmers who would build the continent's technological future. His students never knew they were learning from one of the greatest tech minds of his generation. To them, he was simply Professor Musa, the president's humble brother, who somehow knew an extraordinary amount about computers, artificial intelligence, and systems design. "Professor," one of his brightest students asked, after a particularly complex lecture on quantum computing, "how do you know so much about these technologies? They're cutting-edge developments that most universities don't even teach yet." Musa smiled, remembering similar questions from his early days building his first company. "Knowledge is meant to be shared. The greatest discoveries are worthless if they remain locked away in corporate laboratories. Everything I teach you should be used to solve problems for our people." His classes became legendary at the Institute. Students would crowd into lecture halls designed for 50 to hear Professor Musa explain concepts that textbooks made incomprehensible. But more than technical knowledge, he taught them something more valuable: the belief that African minds could compete with and surpass anyone in the world. "You are not learning to work for Western technology companies. You are learning to build African technology companies that will employ millions and solve uniquely African problems. The next Silicon Valley won't be in California, it will be right here." His students took those words to heart. Within 3 years of the Institute's founding, graduates had launched over 200 startups. Some focused on agriculture technology that helped smallholder farmers increase yields. Others developed financial applications that brought banking to remote villages. Still others created educational software that made learning accessible in local languages. What the Traoré siblings had achieved in Burkina Faso became a model that spread across Africa with remarkable speed. The success was impossible to ignore or dismiss, and other African leaders found themselves under pressure from their own people to follow Ibrahim's example. Amara's intelligence network, now operating openly as the African Coordination Council, facilitated the sharing of best practices and the coordination of continental development strategies. What had begun as a family's plan for revenge against their father's killers had evolved into a systematic transformation of an entire continent. Ghana was the first to follow, using its gold reserves as collateral for similar development programs. Nigeria followed with its oil revenues. Kenya leveraged its agricultural potential. South Africa opened its technological capabilities to continental partners. Within 5 years, the African Union had transformed from a symbolic organization into a genuine economic and political powerhouse. The Western response was predictably complex. Some corporations and governments fought the changes, using legal challenges, economic pressure, and diplomatic intervention to try to maintain the old extractive relationships. But others, recognizing the futility of fighting inevitable change, chose adaptation and partnership instead. The Chinese government, true to their pragmatic nature, were among the first to embrace the new reality. They offered technology transfer, infrastructure investment, and genuine partnership rather than the resource extraction that had characterized previous foreign involvement in Africa. The semiconductor facilities that Musa had proposed were built in 6 African countries, creating hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs and establishing Africa as a major player in global technology supply chains. European governments, facing pressure from their own citizens who had been inspired by the African transformation, began implementing their own wealth redistribution programs. The Musa Code, the simple algorithm he had left behind promoting sharing over accumulation, became a global philosophical movement that influenced policy decisions from Stockholm to São Paulo. 2 years after his resurrection, Musa Traoré was dying. Really dying this time. The cancer he had fought for so long was finally winning, despite the best medical care that the Foundation's resources could provide. But he was not dying alone, and he was not dying as a stranger to himself. Ibrahim visited him every day, bringing reports of the ongoing transformation and updates on international developments. Amara coordinated security and intelligence from a chair beside his bed, ensuring that threats to the Continental Revolution were identified and neutralized before they could develop. His students rotated through in small groups, receiving final lessons from the professor who had changed their understanding of what was possible. "Professor Musa," one of his students asked, during what would be their last conversation, "what was your greatest achievement? We know you've done important work, but what are you most proud of?" Musa thought carefully, as he always did before answering serious questions. "I once thought my greatest achievement was building companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Then I thought it was giving all that money away. But now I know better." He looked around the room at the young faces hanging on his every word, brilliant minds that would carry Africa's technological revolution forward into the future. "My greatest achievement was remembering who I really was. Everything else, the money, the companies, the donations, those were just tools. But becoming myself again, coming home, finding my family, teaching you, that's what made it all worthwhile." The student nodded thoughtfully. "Will you tell us a story, like you used to tell your brother when you were children?" Musa smiled, the request taking him back to those innocent evenings in their childhood home, when the future had seemed full of unlimited possibility and the present had been warm with family love. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice growing stronger with the familiar rhythm, "there were 3 children who were separated by great evil. The evil thought it had won by scattering them across the world. But what the evil didn't understand was that love is stronger than distance, family is stronger than fear, and truth is stronger than power. As he continued the story, a story that was really their story, disguised as a fairy tale, his students listened with rapt attention. It was the story of how the three scattered children grew up to become powerful in different ways, how they found each other again across time and space, and how they used their combined strength to transform not just their own kingdom, but the whole world. And the moral of the story, Musa concluded as his voice grew softer, is that the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels or even knowledge. The greatest treasures are the people we love, the homes we build, and the hope we pass on to the next generation. Musa Traoré died peacefully on a warm evening in March, surrounded by his family and students. His last words were directed to Ibrahim. "Tell them another story tomorrow. Tell them about the clever warrior and his wise advisor who saved their kingdom not with swords, but with sacrifice." His funeral was nothing like the global spectacle that had marked Marcus Beaumont's supposed death. It was simple, traditional, attended by his students, his neighbors, his colleagues at the institute, and his family. He was buried next to their parents in the family plot, the reunion finally complete. But the impact of his life and sacrifice continued to ripple outward like waves in a vast ocean. The Sankara Beaumont Foundation had grown into the largest development organization in human history, funding everything from renewable energy projects to space exploration programs led by African scientists. The continental transformation that had begun with one family's tragedy had become a model for the entire developing world. South American countries began implementing similar resource nationalism policies. Asian nations created their own technology-sharing agreements. The old pattern of wealth extraction from poor countries to rich ones was being systematically dismantled and replaced with genuine partnership and mutual benefit. Western corporations, initially furious about the loss of easy profits, eventually discovered that partnering with empowered developing nations was actually more profitable than exploiting powerless ones. Innovation flourished when brilliant minds had access to resources and education. Markets expanded when billions of people were lifted out of poverty. The global economy grew stronger when it was built on cooperation rather than exploitation. 20 years after Musa's death, Ibrahim stood at the site of the old Bisa gold mine that had symbolized colonial exploitation for over a century. The massive pit had been transformed into a terraced technology campus where young Africans developed solutions to global challenges in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and space exploration. The change was symbolic of everything that had been accomplished. The hole in the ground that represented extraction and exploitation was now filled with buildings that represented creation and empowerment. Where foreign companies had once removed Africa's wealth, African minds now generated innovations that benefited the entire world. A group of students approached him, young people from across the continent who were studying at what was now known as the Musa Traoré Institute for Advanced Technology. They were working on a project to develop sustainable desalination technology that could provide clean water to coastal communities across Africa and beyond.
"President Traoré," one of them said respectfully, "is it true that your brother was once the richest man in the world?" Ibrahim smiled, the same question he had been asked countless times over the years. "He was, but do you know when he was actually richest?" The students shook their heads, though they had heard variations of this story before. "When he gave it all away," Ibrahim explained, "because that's when he got back something worth more than all the money in the world." "What was that?" a young woman asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "His family, his home, his true self, and the knowledge that his life had meaning beyond accumulation."
As evening fell over the transformed landscape, Ibrahim made his way to the small memorial that stood at the center of the campus. It was a simple stone marker with 3 names: their father, their mother, and Musa. Fresh flowers lay at the base, placed there by students, faculty, workers, and visitors who understood that their opportunities existed because of this family's sacrifice. Ibrahim added his own flowers and stood in quiet contemplation. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of progress and hope: construction equipment building new laboratories, students discussing innovative solutions to global challenges, entrepreneurs launching businesses that would employ thousands. "We did it," he whispered to the memorial, as he had done every week for 20 years. "All of us, together, we completed the revolution Father started, the plan Mother designed, the sacrifice you made." The memorial stood silent, but around it the evidence of transformed lives continued to grow. Schools built with foundation money were producing graduates who competed successfully in global universities. Hospitals equipped with the latest technology were saving lives and training medical professionals who served throughout Africa and beyond. Technology companies founded by the Institute graduates were solving problems that Western corporations had ignored because they weren't profitable enough. The transformation hadn't been limited to Africa. The Musa Code, his simple philosophy of sharing over accumulation, had become a global movement that influenced everything from corporate governance to international trade policy. Universities worldwide taught courses on the Burkina Faso model of development. International relations theorists studied the Traoré doctrine of transparent governance and resource nationalism. Most importantly, the story had changed how ordinary people thought about wealth, power, and responsibility. A generation of young entrepreneurs started companies with the explicit goal of solving social problems rather than just generating profits. Philanthropists moved beyond traditional charity to systematic wealth redistribution. Political leaders faced pressure to prioritize the welfare of their people over the interests of international corporations. In corporate boardrooms, the phrase "pulling a Beaumont" became shorthand for the catastrophic loss that could result from treating stakeholders as expendable. Companies began implementing radical transparency measures and profit-sharing programs to avoid the fate of those who had tried to exploit the Traoré family. In government offices, policymakers grappled with the implications of a world where developing nations could actually develop, where resource-rich countries could benefit from their own resources, and where international cooperation was based on mutual benefit rather than extraction and dependency. On the 40th anniversary of their father's assassination, Ibrahim delivered what would be his final major speech as president. He was retiring after serving longer than he had ever intended, confident that the institutions and systems they had built were strong enough to continue without his direct leadership. The speech was delivered not from the presidential palace, but from the Musa Traoré Institute, surrounded by students who represented the future of Africa and the world. Many of them had been born after Marcus Beaumont's death, growing up in a world where African technological leadership was taken for granted, where continental cooperation was the norm, and where the idea that wealth should serve humanity rather than dominate it was simply common sense. 40 years ago, my father was killed for believing that African resources should benefit African people. 30 years ago, my brother gave away the largest fortune in human history to prove that this belief could become reality. 20 years ago, my sister and I completed the work they started by building institutions that would outlast any individual leader. He paused, looking out at the sea of young faces that represented hope made manifest. But the most important work was never done by leaders or billionaires or revolutionaries. It was done by teachers who educated minds, by doctors who saved lives, by engineers who solved problems, by entrepreneurs who created opportunities, by parents who raised children to believe in possibility rather than accept limitation. The audience listened in respectful silence, understanding that they were hearing the conclusion of a story that had shaped their world. "My family's story is ending," Ibrahim continued. "Amara has decided to step down from intelligence work to focus on her own family. I am retiring from politics to spend time with my grandchildren. Our parents and Musa are gone, their sacrifices complete." He smiled, and it was an expression of deep satisfaction and peace. "But your story is just beginning. You are the inheritors of everything we built, everything we sacrificed for, everything we dreamed possible. The question now is not whether you can maintain what we created, but whether you can surpass it. Can you solve problems we never imagined? Can you build bridges we never conceived? Can you create a world that is even more just, more prosperous, more hopeful than the one we handed to you?" The response was thunderous applause, but more than that, it was a commitment. These young people had grown up believing that they could change the world because they had seen it happen. They had been educated to think globally while serving locally, to innovate constantly while respecting tradition, to compete fiercely while cooperating generously. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the 21st century, they would identify the moment when Marcus Beaumont revealed himself as Moussa Traoré as the beginning of the end of the old world order. But those who lived through the changes understood that it was never about one family, one fortune, or one dramatic revelation. It was about the simple but revolutionary idea that human potential should not be limited by the circumstances of birth, that wealth should serve humanity rather than dominate it, and that the greatest power comes not from accumulation, but from the courage to give everything away for something more valuable. The Traoré siblings had proven that individuals could still change history, that families could challenge systems, that transparency could defeat conspiracy, and that love was indeed stronger than greed. But their greatest achievement was demonstrating that such changes were not miraculous exceptions to normal human behavior. They were expressions of human potential that could be replicated anywhere, anytime, by anyone willing to choose sacrifice over selfishness. In business schools, they studied the Marcus Beaumont case as the ultimate example of enlightened capitalism. In history classes, they taught it as the moment when Africa's true independence began. In philosophy courses, they debated the ethics of wealth and the meaning of redemption. In literature classes, they analyzed it as a real-life story that surpassed any fiction in its drama and meaning. But in the villages and cities of Africa, in the homes and schools where children learned about their heritage and their possibilities, they told a simpler story. It was the story of 3 children who were separated by tragedy but reunited by love, who chose family over fortune and truth over power, and who proved that the greatest treasures in life could not be stolen, only shared. The revolution that began with a billionaire's offer had become something far greater than its origins, a permanent transformation in how humanity understood its potential and its responsibilities. And that revolution would continue, carried forward by every child who learned that they mattered, every entrepreneur who chose purpose over profit, every leader who served rather than exploited, and every person who understood that the ultimate measure of a life was not what you accumulated, but what you gave away. The story of the Traoré family had ended, but the story they had made possible, the story of human potential unleashed and human dignity restored, would never end. It would continue to unfold with each new generation, each new challenge overcome, each new possibility realized. As Musa had written in his final message, the algorithm for happiness isn't in accumulation, but in distribution. The bug in our system isn't poverty, but greed. Debug your life by sharing it. And across the world, millions of people were doing exactly that, creating a future that would have seemed impossible before 3 siblings proved that love, sacrifice, and truth could indeed change everything. The end.